You know, usually when a massive new consumer technology drops, think about the smartphone, for instance.
Right, yeah.
Everyone across the globe basically figures it out at the exact same time. Like you could walk into a coffee shop in New York or Paris or Tokyo,
And it looks exactly the same.
totally identical. Everyone is just, hunched over their glowing rectangles, swiping away.
Yeah.
The adoption is practically instantaneous.
Yeah, the diffusion of consumer tech is just incredibly uniform across the developed world. I mean, it doesn't respect borders.
No, not at all.
If an app solves a human problem, it crosses the ocean in a matter of weeks.
But then, you step out of that coffee shop and into the modern workplace in early 2026.
Which is a very different story.
Completely different. Suddenly, it's like there's this invisible wall right down the middle of the Atlantic Ocean.
Yeah.
When it comes to actually using artificial intelligence on the job to get things done, the scene in that New York office looks vastly, almost unrecognizably different from the one in Paris or Rome.
It really is a staggering divergence. And it's a gap that has economists watching with a very close, very anxious eye.
I bet. Because it's not just a tech trend, right?
Exactly. If you study labor markets and productivity, we've actually seen this exact movie play out before.
Yeah.
And it dramatically reshapes the global economy.
Right. And that invisible wall in the Atlantic, it is the exact same divide that caused Europe to lose the massive tech and internet boom of the 1990s.
Which is a huge deal.
It really is. So today we're doing a deep dive into a phenomenal new paper by Dr. Jonathan H. Westover. It's titled The Transatlantic AI Divide.
And it's an incredible piece of research.
It is. This isn't just a small sample size. This is a comprehensive analysis drawing on surveys of over 55,000 workers across 7 major economies.
Plus deep, firm-level data from 32 different countries.
Yeah, 32.
It's just one of the most robust data sets we've seen. It gives us this unprecedented look at who is actually leveraging AI right now, early in 2026.
Right.
And far more importantly, the underlying mechanics of how and why they are using it.
Okay, let's unpack this. We know there's a divide, but before we can piece together the why behind it, we really need to understand the shape of this gap on the ground.
Yeah, the baseline facts.
Right. Because when I hear that the U.S. is pulling ahead, my initial thought is, just a few percentage points. How stark is the contrast we're actually talking about here?
Oh, it's much wider than a few percentage points. As of early 2026, the data shows that 43% of U.S. workers are actively using generative AI for their jobs.
43%? Wow.
Yeah, that is nearly half the American workforce integrating this into their daily routines. Now, compare that to Europe, where the average sits at just 32%.
And obviously, Europe isn't a monolith, right? I imagine the tech hubs look different from, say, the more traditional manufacturing centers.
Oh, absolutely. There's a significant range there. You have the UK at the higher end, sitting at about 36% worker adoption.
Which is respectable.
It is. But then you travel south to Italy, and that number drops to just 26%.
Oof. It's a big drop.
Yeah, so right out of the gate, the U.S. adoption rate is roughly 68% higher than Italy's. But here's the crucial detail. The gap isn't just about having an account or, logging in once a month to write a single email.
Right, right.
The real story, the one that actually impacts the economy, is the intensity gap.
Meaning the actual volume of time spent using the tools to produce work.
Precisely. This is where the divergence becomes structural. U.S. workers are spending about 5.2% of their total work hours actively augmented by AI.
Over 5% of their whole week.
Yeah. Meanwhile, European workers are spending only 1.0 to 1.8% of their time on it.
Wait, is this like comparing people who simply own a gym membership to people who actually spend 5 hours a week on the treadmill? Having the app doesn't mean you're getting the gains.
That is the perfect way to visualize.
You have to actually be sweating on the machine.
Exactly. The sheer volume of hours being augmented by AI in the U.S. completely dwarfs what we are seeing in Europe.
Right.
Now, I should add a slight asterisk here.
Oh, what's the catch?
Well, measuring this at the firm level, like asking companies if they use AI rather than surveying individual workers, it presents some really thorny measurement challenges.
Why is that? Are the companies hiding their AI use, or is it just bad survey design?
It mostly comes down to how different statistical agencies ask the question.
Oh, bureaucracy.
Right. The European Union's Enterprise Survey asks firms a very broad question. They basically ask, do you use AI for any business purpose?
Okay, that makes sense.
And under that wide umbrella, about 20% of EU firms say yes. But historically, The U.S. Business Trends and Outlook survey asked a much narrower, almost industrial age question.
What did they ask?
They asked, do you use AI in producing goods or services?
Ah, I see the trap there.
Yeah, it's very restrictive.
So the U.S. survey was only counting the actual manufacturing line or the direct service delivery. If the HR department was using AI to draft onboarding documents,
Exactly.
or the marketing team was using it to brainstorm campaigns, the company might check no on that survey because it wasn't the core product.
You've hit the nail on the head. And under that strict production definition, the U.S. reported only 7% firm adoption.
7%. That completely contradicts the worker-level data.
Completely. But Dr. Westover's analysis does some brilliant adjustment work to fix this. By analyzing the ratio of any purpose to production uses in the detailed European data, they recalibrated the U.S. numbers to match.
Oh, that's clever.
Yeah. And when adjusted for any purpose, the U.S. firm adoption rate is actually around 34%.
Wow. So at 34%, the U.S. is way ahead of that 20% European average.
Yeah, essentially rivaling the absolute leaders in Europe, like the Netherlands and the Nordic countries.
The macro picture is pretty indisputable once the data is aligned then. The U.S. is using AI more broadly across more sectors and vastly more intensely.
Indisputable, yes.
So when I look at an advantage like that, my first thought is, well, obviously, the U.S. is home to Silicon Valley.
Right, the geographic advantage.
Yeah, it feels like a purely demographic advantage. The U.S. has huge tech companies, a younger workforce in those sectors, and just a massive culture of early adopters. Does the data back up that assumption?
So this brings us to what economists call compositional factors.
Okay.
It is incredibly tempting to look at the U.S. advantage and chalk it up to a workforce demographic that naturally gravitates toward new tech. And to be fair, there are clear global demographic trends in the data.
Who exactly are the typical early adopters, globally speaking? Like, who is actually using this stuff the most?
Well, across every country surveyed, AI use is substantially higher among university-educated workers. It's about 25 percentage points higher than those without a degree.
That makes sense. White-collar desk jobs and all that.
Right. It is also 14 points higher among younger workers under the age of 46.
Okay, the younger crowd.
You see a slight edge among men by about 4 points, though that specific gender gap is rapidly narrowing.
Good to know.
And finally, you see massive adoption spikes in larger firms, specifically those with over 250 employees, and in quantitative sectors like IT, finance, and math.
So the skeptical mind might look at that list and say, case closed.
Yeah, you'd think so.
The U.S. has massive tech conglomerates, a specific educational makeup, and maybe that entirely explains why they are pulling ahead of a country like Italy, which might have an older workforce or a larger share of small to medium enterprises.
And researchers tested exactly that theory using a statistical method called an Oaxaca blinder decomposition.
Okay, that sounds intensely academic. How does that actually work in practice?
Think of it like trying to figure out why one runner is consistently faster than another.
Okay, I'm with you.
First, you adjust for all the obvious, visible stuff. Their age, the type of running shoes they wear, whether they had a tailwind, their baseline fitness level.
Right, control for the variables.
Exactly. The Oaxaca blinder decomposition is just the mathematical version of doing that. The researchers went through the data set and mathematically stripped away all the differences in age, education, gender, industry makeup, and firm size between the U.S. and Europe.
Oh, wow. So they totally leveled the playing field to see what was left.
They did, and they found that all of those visible differences only account for about 55% of the U.S.-Europe adoption gap.
Wait, what? Which means 45% of this massive transatlantic gap is completely unexplained by demographics or company size or having a younger workforce.
Correct.
Almost half of the mystery is just sitting there in the dark.
It is. But this is the aha moment in the paper. The researchers found the missing puzzle piece, and it has absolutely nothing to do with being a tech whiz or having a computer science degree.
Then what is it?
It is entirely about management practices.
Management, like how performance reviews are conducted or how targets are set?
Yes, the actual structural framework of how a company is run. The data shows a massive correlation between high scores on the World Management Survey, which measures structured, performance-oriented, lean management practices, and AI adoption.
Really? Just basic good management?
Yeah. The U.S. systematically scores higher on these management indices across the board, and you can see the impact vividly within individual countries, too.
Oh, so it's not just a U.S. versus Europe thing.
Exactly. In the U.K., for instance, only 2% of firms with poor management practices use AI. But when you look at the best managed top decile firms in the UK, that number jumps tenfold to 20%.
Wait, so you're telling me that a 50-year-old in a traditional industry with a great manager is more likely to use AI than a 25-year-old tech whiz with a terrible manager? How much of this is just the U.S. having more performance-obsessed management cultures?
The data strongly suggests that the organizational culture is the dominant force here. Think about what a general-purpose technology is. Whether it was the desktop computer in the 90s or generative AI today, these tools require you to completely reorganize how work gets done. You can't just drop the software on a desk.
Right, you have to actually use it.
You have to change workflows, redefine job roles, and manage information differently. Firms with structured, performance-oriented management are simply better positioned to make those structural adaptations.
Because they're already tracking performance.
Exactly. They are already obsessed with efficiency, so when a tool comes along that promises a 10% edge, they tear up the floorboards to integrate it.
But if management is the deciding factor, what exactly are these high-performing managers doing on a day-to-day basis? Because, good management is a bit of a buzzword.
It definitely is.
What are the practical steps that get a team to actually open the software and use it?
Well, the paper breaks down organizational support into three distinct measurable pillars: tools, training, and encouragement.
Okay, tools, training, encouragement. Got it.
Tools means literally providing the enterprise software licenses and paying the subscription fees. Training is the formal education, the seminars on how to prompt, data privacy guidelines, the official how-to classes.
And encouragement.
Encouragement is the cultural signal from leadership. It's the boss explicitly saying that experimenting with AI is allowed, desired, and safe.
Logically, I would assume you need a perfect trinity of all three. You buy the software, you hire a consultant to teach them how to use it, and you tell them to go forth and conquer.
What's fascinating here is that formal AI training is surprisingly irrelevant on its own.
Wait, really? The actual how-to seminars don't move the needle? I feel like half of LinkedIn is selling prompt engineering courses right now.
Barely at all. Once you control for the other factors in the data, the statistical significance of formal training essentially vanishes.
That is wild.
Yeah. The single strongest predictor of AI adoption across the entire globe is employer encouragement.
Just the boss saying, hey, try this out. Why is that so much more powerful than a 10-hour tutorial?
Because of the psychology of the modern workplace, workers are terrified of doing the wrong thing.
Oh, sure. Nobody wants to get in trouble.
Right. If I use AI to draft a quarterly report, am I going to be fired for being lazy? Am I committing plagiarism? What if the AI hallucinates a number and I send it to a client?
The liability is scary.
Very. If management doesn't explicitly sanction the use of these tools, the rational, self-preserving move for an employee is to either hide their AI use or just not use it at all.
It sounds like giving someone a fancy new sports car. If you give them the keys but say, don't you dare scratch it, it stays in the garage. If you say, let's see how fast this goes, they drive it, even if they haven't taken a formal driving class.
That is exactly the dynamic playing out in the data. Look at the staggering proof among workers who are provided with zero formal training and zero specialized enterprise tools.
Meaning they're just using free public versions of AI on their own.
Right. A whopping 47% of them will still adopt AI into their daily workflow if their employer simply encourages it.
47% with no tools and no training.
Yes. But if there is no encouragement, that adoption rate plummets to just 10%.
That is a massive delta.
It is almost entirely about organizational signals. Workers need psychological safety to experiment. And this brings us right back to the transatlantic divide and why the U.S. is winning.
Right, a gap.
In the U.S., 42% of workers report receiving both encouragement and tools from their employers.
Almost half the American workforce is getting the explicit green light from their boss. What does that look like in Europe?
In places like France and Italy, it's only 16 to 17%.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And when you factor this specific encouragement metric into our runner analogy from earlier, it statistically explains almost the entire remaining U.S.-Europe adoption gap. The mystery 45% is almost entirely a gap in managerial encouragement.
That is wild. Okay, so American workers are driving the sports car because their bosses told them it was safe to do so. But is this actually making the company more money, or is it just a fun toy that makes writing emails slightly less tedious? Because getting people to use a tool is one thing, but if it doesn't fundamentally move the needle on productivity, who cares?
Oh, it is moving the needle. The micro-level evidence detailed in the paper is staggering. We are seeing incredible individual productivity boosts across highly diverse, complex fields.
Like what?
Well, software developers using AI tools like Copilot are completing coding tasks 55% faster, with absolutely no drop in the quality of the code.
55% faster. That's doing an 8-hour day in less than 4 hours. How are they doing that? They can't possibly be typing that much faster.
They aren't typing faster, they are bypassing the friction. Instead of spending 3 hours hunting down a syntax error on a forum, the AI spots the bug in 3 seconds.
Right. It does the tedious stuff.
Yeah, they're skipping the boilerplate setup and focusing purely on the high-level architecture. And it's not just coding. Professional writers using ChatGPT are completing writing tasks 40% faster.
Again, how? Is the AI just churning out the whole document?
It's about overcoming the blank page. The AI generates a messy first draft, and the human acts as an editor rather than a creator from scratch.
That makes total sense. Editing is usually faster than drafting.
Exactly. And independent evaluators in these studies actually rated the AI-assisted output as 18% higher in quality. The writers weren't just faster, they were better.
Wow. Faster and better.
We see this everywhere. Customer support agents are resolving 15% more issues per hour because the AI is pulling up client histories instantly.
That's huge for call centers.
Law students are doing legal research up to 32% faster because they aren't manually reading through decades of case law.
And does this translate when you step out of a highly controlled academic experiment and just ask normal workers sitting in their cubicles?
Yes, the self-reported data aligns beautifully with the experiments. Workers who use AI estimate they are saving about 5.8% of their work hours every single week.
Okay, so that's the individual level. We know the individual coder is faster. Does it show up in the macroeconomy? Like, are we seeing this move the actual GDP numbers for these countries?
It is starting to, yes. The researchers looked at industry-level data across 29 European countries and the U.S.
And what did they find?
They found that a 10 percentage point increase in AI adoption within a specific industry correlates with 2 to 5 percentage points of extra productivity growth between 2019 and the 2024-2025 period.
That is a massive macroeconomic tailwind.
Huge.
Here's where it gets really interesting. If a writer is 40% faster, why isn't the company firing 40% of their writers? Is AI just making the output higher quality, or are we just in a honeymoon phase before the layoffs hit?
It is the great employment paradox of AI right now. Economists scoured the labor data in the U.S., in Denmark, and across 16 different European countries, waiting to see the first massive wave of AI-induced layoffs.
Did they find them?
And they found
Yeah.
nothing. Despite these massive productivity leaps, rigorous studies show no meaningful job displacement or negative employment effects so far.
How is that mathematically possible? If a team of 10 can now do the work of 15, 5 people should theoretically be out of a job.
The paper outlines 3 highly objective possibilities for why the math is currently defying our expectations.
Okay, let's hear them.
First, and most simply, it might just be too early. AI accelerated massively in 2023 and 2024, and labor markets take time to adjust.
That's true. Hiring and firing cycles are pretty slow.
Right. We might just be in a lag period, and the shoe could still drop.
So, cautious optimism, but keep your guard up. What's the second reason?
The gains might be manifesting primarily in quality rather than just speed. Think about a management consultant.
Okay.
If they use AI, they might still spend 40 hours a week on a project, but the report they deliver is vastly deeper, better researched, and more polished than it would have been without AI.
So the client is getting a much better product for the same time spent.
Yes. Productivity increases because the value of the output is higher. But you don't need fewer consultants. You just have much happier clients paying a premium for better work.
Elevating the baseline of the work rather than just churning out the same baseline faster? I like that. And the third reason?
The phenomenon of demand expansion. Let's look at the legal research example again.
Right, the paralegals.
If paralegals can do research 32% faster, a law firm doesn't necessarily fire their paralegals. Instead, because the cost of research has effectively dropped, the firm can take on more cases.
Oh, that's interesting.
Or they can lower their prices, which means a whole new segment of the population can suddenly afford legal services, expanding the total size of the market. The firm keeps all its current workers just to handle the new, massive volume of business.
Okay, so we have a technology that boosts productivity dramatically, elevates the quality of work, and has shown no immediate job losses yet.
Hmm.
But we have a massive global divide in who is actually allowed and encouraged to use it. What does this mean for the listener who is trying to navigate this and for the global economy at large?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the economic implications are profound. Remember how we started by talking about the 1990s?
Yeah, the internet boom.
In the 90s, the U.S. aggressively adopted information and communication technology, the internet, essentially, and Europe lagged behind. The result of that hesitation was a massive structural productivity gap.
How big is the gap?
Well, U.S. output per hour increased 85% between 1995 and 2025, compared to just 29% in Europe.
Wow. And Dr. Westover's paper is warning that this exact same divergence is happening right now with generative AI.
Precisely. If Europe doesn't focus intensely on what the paper calls organizational readiness, they risk repeating that exact same decades-long economic lag.
That's a scary thought for policymakers over there.
It really is. Now, this puts regulators in a very delicate position. Take the EU AI Act, for example. Policymakers are having to perform a highly complex balancing act.
Because they have to protect people, right?
They do. They have a mandate to protect citizens from potential harms of unregulated AI, which is absolutely vital. But simultaneously, if rules become overly restrictive, or even if they just create regulatory uncertainty where companies aren't sure what is legal.
Firms become terrified.
Exactly. And as we've seen in the data, if firms are terrified, they don't encourage their workers. And without employer encouragement, adoption plummets.
The regulators have to somehow build safety guardrails without accidentally crushing that vital culture of experimentation. Because if you kill the experimentation, you kill the productivity gains.
That's the tightrope. It's not about forcing technology onto workers. It's about establishing clear, safe boundaries so that managers feel legally and culturally confident saying, go ahead and try this out.
So what does this all mean? If you're listening to this on your commute, wondering why your office feels so far behind the AI curve, the answer isn't a lack of software, and it isn't a lack of technical skill.
Oh, not at all.
Whether you are managing a division of 500 people or you are a junior employee trying to figure out your place in the modern office, the takeaway from this massive 55,000-person data set is surprisingly human. If you want to leverage AI, do not wait for a formal training seminar to drop onto your calendar.
The data explicitly proves that waiting for formal training is a trap.
Cultivating a culture of psychological safety, where active experimentation is rewarded and failure isn't punished, that is the ultimate cheat code for AI adoption. Give yourself and your team the permission to just drive the sports car.
You know, it raises an important question, though. We have spent so much time over the last few years debating the macroeconomic effects of this technology. Like, will AI take our jobs? Will it replace human workers?
It's the underlying anxiety everyone feels the first time they open ChatGPT and see what it can do.
But based on this data, if we look at how adoption actually happens, we might be looking at the wrong threat entirely. If we think back to that invisible wall in the Atlantic we talked about at the beginning, the technology crosses the ocean instantly. The internet is global.
Right.
The real divide isn't about access to the software.
No, it's about the management culture. The 45% of the gap that comes down entirely to how performance is managed and how experimentation is encouraged.
Right. So what if the real threat isn't AI replacing humans at all?
What if the actual threat is companies with an encouragement culture moving so incredibly fast and getting so fiercely productive that they completely render companies with a restrictive culture obsolete?
It is entirely possible. We might not see a mass extinction of human workers, but we might be about to see a mass extinction of micromanaged companies.
A survival of the most encouraging. That is a fascinating thought to leave on. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep experimenting, keep asking questions, and we will see you next time.